Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Hey guys, welcome back. Let's do it. Endsieg, Germany's final plan to win World War II, 1943 to 45. All the buttons, do all the stuff. Original link, the top description below. Discord right below that. Let's get into it. If you're not ready to learn, you know the drill. Get out of here. Or just chill, that's fine. Let's go.
Hi, I'm Griffin Johnson, the Armchair Historian. In this episode, we will attempt to plumb the depths of desperation and fanaticism that were the final days of the Second World War in the panic-stricken minds of both Hitler and his high command. The grinding days of 1943 to 1945 were a delusional period for Germany, a heady cocktail of crushing reality stirred in with ideological blindness, steering an intoxicated Nazi leadership towards ever more extreme measures in their bid for Endsieg, or ultimate victory. We will look at the dismal situation Nazi Germany...
I've been watching a lot of Pacific World War II documentaries in the past few days, and Okinawa was I kind of thought sometimes these questions can be iffy, but they can be fun too. I kind of figured, like, if you had to go into battle on either storming Okinawa or Normandy on D-Day, which would you choose? And to me, the Japanese just seem to be more fanatical than the Germans. Not to say the Germans weren't fanatical, but it seems like you were more likely to get a German soldier to surrender than a Japanese soldier, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And yeah, I just kind of thought about that, like, which would you rather do if you had to be... I think I just, because I've been watching the Japanese stuff, I'm like, okay, put me in Europe, just put me over there. Not just because the Japanese seemed a little bit more fanatical, but because the heat and it being in the jungle, in a lot of places you're in more tropical climates, I think would have been just more horrific, just to put it that way.
Or ultimate victory. We will look at the dismal situation Nazi Germany faced at the end of the war and examine the insidious ways that Hitler and his generals planned to achieve their Endsieg, or else to punish what they saw as the cowardly German population that dared to betray their Führer. As you're probably aware...
See, with Japan, I feel like that wasn't even a thing. I don't think Japan even had to worry about their population not fully committing themselves and their loved ones just fully to the cause. I just think they were brought up, and I'm not trying to downplay the sort of fanaticism and that Nazism and instilled in young people, but I just don't think it was on the same level as Japan. Again, I've been watching Japanese videos, or not Japanese videos, just videos about the war in the Pacific recently, and maybe because that's so fresh in my mind, it's altering my viewpoint, but that's just how I feel right now.
Dared to betray their Führer. As you're probably aware, Germany's plans during the Second World War were constantly frustrated by the efforts of Allied codebreakers, often to the point where they might as well have been posting them directly to the internet via unsecured coffee shop Wi-Fi. Fortunately for us today, NordVPN provides users with the...
I've been really kind of thinking about, should I be showing... I'm pausing. I mean, you guys can always fast forward, and I'm thinking, like, should I be showing... the ads, and I'm going to. I might not be so strict on this. Maybe tomorrow I'll skip through an ad, but I just want to let this
kind of data protection
if you guys
that
don't
puts
want
the
to
Enigma
watch,
machine to shame.
Press the right arrow button.
NordVPN lets you access a full suite of historical materials, videos, and documentaries from various websites that might otherwise be subject to region locking. And if you don't trust certain websites, Nord has a tool which automatically blocks websites known for phishing or spreading spyware or malware. Prevent your ISP from throttling your internet or invading your privacy using Nord's military-grade encryption software. On On top of that, you can change virtual locations
This
with
and
one
Raid
click,
Shadow
utilizing over
Legends
5,200 servers in
have to
59
be,
countries
like,
on up to 6 devices
90%
at once.
of all
Armchair
advertisements on
Historian fans
YouTube.
get 73% off the 2-year plan with 4 additional months for free. All you need to do is go to
Not played ads, but sort of,
nordvpn.com/historyvpn to start surfing securely and safely within just a few minutes. Click the link in the description box
putting
to
the ads in
grab
their
the deal
videos.
and try Nord without risks thanks to their 30-day money-back guarantee.
Let's do it. I love this channel. It's still not quite Epic History TV to me. To me, Epic History TV, it feels like home to me, and I'm getting more subscribers. I think I'm over 1,700 now. Thank you guys so much. But this one is creeping up there. This is a great channel.
It is February 1943. The cracks are beginning to show on the Eastern Front. The Battle of Stalingrad ending with both the Soviets and Nazis battered. But the Soviets can weather the beating. The retreat is draining Germany's oil. The Soviets are draining Germany's manpower. And the privations of war are draining Germany's hope.
I recognize that statue of the kids holding hands. I guess that's in Stalingrad.
And the privations of
Obviously,
war are
just
draining Germany's hope. Joseph Goebbels, infamous minister of propaganda and the man who convinced a nation that millions of innocents just had to die, takes to the podium.
Can I ask you guys something? I'm sorry I'm pausing again so quickly, but this is a big thing that I've thought about. What is considered propaganda? I guess, like, if you had to give a definition, obviously I could look it up right here, but the problem I have with the word propaganda is that there doesn't seem to be this solid, just like, this is propaganda, this isn't propaganda. Obviously, I guess it's misleading, but I could go on this forever, but just what has to be, what criteria, there we go, have to be met in order for something to be considered propaganda? Yeah.
Sell the German people on the
What you
words
guys think?
emblazoned on the banners overhead. Totaler Krieg. Total War.
Wir sind in diesem Kampf zu der Erkenntnis gekommen, dass das deutsche Volk hier seine heiligsten Güter, das 2000-jährige Erbe seiner Kultur und alles, was uns das Leben lebenswert macht, zu verteidigen hat. Der totale Krieg ist das Gebot der Stunde. Die Gefahr, vor der wir stehen, ist riesengroß. Riesengroß müssen deshalb auch die Anstrengungen sein, mit denen wir ihr entgegentreten. Ich frage euch, wollt ihr den totalen Krieg? Ich frage euch, ist euer Vertrauen zum Führer heute größer, gläubiger und unerschütterlicher denn je? Ist eure Bereitschaft, ihm auf allen seinen Wegen zu folgen und alles zu tun, was nötig ist, um den Krieg zum siegreichen Ende zu führen? Nun, Volk, steht auf und Sturm bricht los!
I feel like I'm so scarred from everything I've been watching with the war in the Pacific and the Japanese the past few days, that I'm like so desensitized right now that I'm almost like, oh my god, yep, of course, when this really should be, obviously is shocking stuff, but I'm gonna stop bringing up the Japanese. Obviously, it has nothing to do with this. Well, not nothing. They are allies. Let's do it.
Whether the people were willing to follow or not, Totaler Krieg wouldn't save the Third Reich. The failure of Operation Fall Blau, or Case Blue, was a major contributor to the eventual Axis defeat on the Eastern Front. Although many will argue that the invasion of the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa, was doomed from the start. Launched in June of 1942, Case Blue was an attempt to simultaneously cut off Soviet access to resupply from the Black Sea and capture the oil fields located in the Caucasus. The oil wells of Baku were of paramount importance, as Germany had exhausted its pre-war petroleum reserves. Yet, ironically, the operation designed to address this shortage only exacerbated it, as the marathon drive toward Caucasia and the scorched earth defense by Soviet forces stretched already fragile fuel lines, leaving their offensives in the east all but dead in the water. Case Blue culminated in the Battle of Stalingrad, which marked the deepest penetration of Nazi troops into the Soviet Union. But although they inflicted grievous losses on the Red Army, the offensive was ultimately turned back, along with practically all of the momentum on the Eastern Front. Germany went into the Caucasus for oil and triumph, but left with empty tanks and full graveyards. As bad as this situation was, Nazi officials had reason for some confidence. The Allied raid at Dieppe, France, in August of 1942 was an embarrassing failure and a windfall for the German propaganda ministry, indicating that the Allies lacked the expertise to launch an amphibious invasion of Europe. The Luftwaffe also regularly inflicted heavy casualties on Allied bomber sorties, giving hope that they could still win the war in the air in the long term. This optimism was strengthened with the knowledge that cutting-edge jet fighters like the Me-262 might enter production within a year.
I want to stop and say this guy has an amazing channel. Armchair Historian is so good. For some reason, I always kind of like the British accent in teaching history, but this guy, he has the animations down. His setup is so nice. His material is great. He's very professional. Such a good channel. I'll try to stop.
But these dreams became increasingly far-fetched, as Germany's answer to its logistical challenges was the creation of ever more complex Wunderwaffe, or wonder weapons, that created more of the same challenges: V-2 rocket systems to rain holy terror on petulant Londoners, STG-44s that would influence modern assault rifles, mouse tanks to grind the Judeo-Bolsheviks into dust, and other incredible inventions that were largely either too expensive, ineffective, or impractical. Fuel was a constant concern, with the Wehrmacht juggling supplies of petrol and synthetic gas to power its desperate operations. Far more sinisterly, the Germans relied on slave labor from concentration camp inmates, who suffered both from the malice of their oppressors as well as industrial accidents.
I heard everything
All
there,
of
don't
these
worry.
issues saw Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister and the man with his hands on the levers of German industry, playing an ever more challenging game of the floor is lava economic edition. Fritz Reinhardt, state secretary in the German finance ministry, reportedly said, "The contributions that have been allocated to paying off the interest and principal on the national debt must henceforth be covered by current revenues earned from the economic exploitation of the Eastern territories." This economic exploitation, one of the many schemes designed to remedy Germany's excessive spending, paradoxically worsened the German economic condition, in large part because the scheme was falsely predicated on a quick and decisive military conquest. But Hitler and his advisors hardly concerned themselves with these practical considerations. They had Nazi ideology, which elevated the war to an apocalyptic struggle between the superior Aryan race and the Untermensch, who stood between them and the mastery of Europe. Early success in Poland and France had taught the Nazi Party that shortcomings in strategy or logistics could be overcome by raw Germanic prowess, encouraging blind belief in Nazi.
I was so surprised in how many. I don't know if I learned it in something I reacted to or something I just watched the past few days, but I didn't realize how heavily the German army relied on horses for transportation. They didn't have nearly as many trucks that the U.S. brought over and with the help of Great Britain, eventually freed France and then went into Germany with. Yeah, I didn't realize how much they relied on horses.
Nazi supremacy and downplaying objective analysis of defeats or strategic blunders. After all, as Hitler said regarding Operation Barbarossa, all the Germans had to do was kick the door in and the entire structure would come crashing down. That they kept having to find more doors to kick was another matter. Even after the failure of Case Blue, Hitler tried to keep the army on an offensive footing, but his plans were constantly postponed. Meanwhile, Soviet winter counteroffensives made inroads on Nazi-held territory, forming a salient around the city of Kursk. With summer approaching, Hitler authorized Operation Citadel, a massive attack on this salient by Army Group Center and Army Group South. What followed is often considered one of the largest tank battles in history, the Luftwaffe and Panzer divisions exhausting themselves trying to break through the Soviet defenses and envelop the salient. Yet this salient would ultimately hold, and Operation Citadel represented everything wrong with the German war effort. It was a reactionary move based on vague strategic goals that, even if successful, would merely delay the inevitable. After the failure at Kursk, the German disposition would permanently shift to the defensive. Even so, German morale endured the disaster at Kursk, and the Wehrmacht remained an effective fighting force throughout 1943. This was primarily due to the efforts of...
What are those anti-mine things? Those, I'm guessing, in the front? That's all I can think that they might be.
Force throughout 1943.
Attached to the front of the tank.
This was primarily due to the efforts of men like the disaster at Kursk. Even so, German morale endured the disaster at Kursk, and the Wehrmacht remained an effective fighting force throughout 1943. This was primarily due to the efforts of men like Walter Model and Albert Kesselring, who effectively transitioned the German army to a defensive posture. Hopes rested on a series of fortifications constructed along the Dnieper River, sometimes known as the Ostwall. Despite hurling up to 3 million Soviet soldiers at the Ostwall in August, the Red Army was unable to cross the Dnieper for nearly 3 months. Meanwhile, in the west, the Allied invasion of Italy was brought to a standstill at the Gustav Line in December. As winter set in, Hitler hoped that Germany could hold out until the unholy alliance between the capitalist Western Allies and the communist USSR collapsed under its own ideological weight. Germany could hold out until the unholy alliance between the capitalist Western Allies and the communist USSR collapsed under its own ideological weight.
You guys, how did Hitler view capitalism? I definitely, in terms of me and my viewers, I definitely am not as well learned as a lot of you guys. So, if you know a bit more about what the National Socialist, what was the German Workers' Party, like what their view on capitalism was. Obviously, they hated communism and Judaism. I'm not sure. I think they believed them to be linked. But I've also heard that he disliked American capitalism too, and he was kind of somewhere in the middle. But if you have more insight, I'd love to learn about that.
Unfortunately for Germany, reality finally came knocking on Hitler's door in June of 1944, when the Normandy landings blew through the Atlantic Wall and cost Germany nearly 500,000 casualties, while Operation Bagration in the east shattered the Germans' precious battle lines at the cost of around 400,000 men. With Germany's forces being ground to a pulp by the Soviets, Romania and Bulgaria defected in 1944, and the panicked Germans occupied Hungary to prevent their defection, even as the Hungarian Prime Minister begged the Soviets for a separate peace. Though German ferocity delayed the Allied advance, they could not match their superiority in men, materiel, and air power. Hemorrhaging manpower, and with hardly any supplies or economic strength remaining, the Germans had to get creative to replace their mounting losses. In addition to raising 78 Volksgrenadier divisions and moving extant regiments around,
though often confused with the Volkssturm Militia. Volksgrenadiers were professional rear echelon soldiers drafted for frontline combat and led by veteran officers and NCOs.
To bring 78 Volksgrenadier divisions and moving extant regiments around to create new armies on paper.
What is NCO? Non-combat officer or something like that? That was a total guess, honestly.
And moving extant regiments around to create new armies on paper, the Germans made a desperate attempt to augment their forces in the form of the Volkssturm, or People's Storm. On October 18, 1944, Hitler personally ordered that all civilian males aged 16 to 60 join a new force that would continue to protect the Reich. The Volkssturm was not an organ of the Wehrmacht, which Hitler was beginning to see as weak and incompetent, but rather a paramilitary militia controlled by the Nazi Party. Allied intelligence at the time estimated that at full strength, the Volkssturm could have mustered over 13 million fighters to oppose the march to Berlin. Less than half that number could put up an honest fight. The Volkssturm were initially issued whatever uniforms could be scrounged up, but as the logistical situation deteriorated, their only standard piece of equipment became a black and red armband, identifying them as members of the militia, which led to members fighting in everything from civilian business suits to hand-me-down Imperial German kits from the First World War. The Volkssturm were armed with a hodgepodge of civilian hunting rifles, weapons captured from Allied and Scandinavian countries, and surprisingly ingenious last-ditch weapons. An example of this last category was the Eintos Flammenwerfer.
I would love like an old rifle like that, just so I could like take it apart and like put it back together and just see how it works.
An example of this last category was the Eintos Flammenwerfer, a portable single-shot flamethrower. The Eintos was essentially an oversized aerosol bottle designed to fire a single half-second gout of flame before being discarded, in the same vein as the single-shot Panzerfaust. Such a weapon would have been as simple as point and roast, making it perfect for civilian users. German resistance would not end at the front line, however. Joseph Goebbels launched a massive propaganda push centered around a partisan network, Wehrwolf, which would, in theory, continue the war even in the event of a German defeat. People the foolish Allies would take for friendly civilians would in fact be hardened fighters, with National Socialism burning in their hearts and ready to transform at any moment into a fighting force to sow discord and strife among the Allies. Nazi partisans would, in reality, carry out or take credit for numerous assassinations and sabotage operations during the final years of the war. But the massive organization Goebbels wrote about was never a serious threat. With Wunderwaffe in hand, the Germans would win the war. Maybe. The Fuhrer realized that only a grand offensive could now conclude the war for Germany favorably. The question was where it stood the best chance of success, as action against the Soviets or in Italy would bear little fruit. There was, however, one sector which had historically served the German army well. Hitler, no doubt fueled by a sense of 1940 nostalgia, ordered a massive armored attack through the lightly defended Ardennes region. His goal was to drive onto Antwerp and isolate the Commonwealth forces in Holland, knocking them out of the war and forcing Britain into another Dunkirk to save what soldiers would be left. Perhaps even triggering negotiations for peace and freeing up German troops to finally defeat the inferior Soviets in the East. Hitler was proven partly right in his predictions when the offensive, codenamed Operation Wacht am Rhein, took the American defenders by complete surprise, causing panic in their lines. However, in a characteristic display of hubris, Hitler and his high command had not only severely underestimated the fighting prowess of the American army, which after the initial shock continued to provide tenacious resistance on key crossroads and towns all over the Ardennes, but they had also failed to provide their army with enough fuel. Exhausted and undersupplied, the battered remnants were ultimately ordered to withdraw entirely when a strong Allied counterattack forced its way through their weakened lines. Hitler's final gamble had utterly failed, and with it Germany's last military reserves, so desperately needed to repel the forthcoming winter offensive on the Eastern Front, had been spent. Germany's remaining defenders now have their work cut out for them. In January 1945, the Soviets built on the momentum of Operation Bagration to launch the Vistula-Oder offensive.
I almost don't want to bring up the Japanese because this isn't about them. I just happen to be watching them, and I'm afraid what I'm saying it might take away from this. But the fanaticism, this is about Germany. I know. The fanaticism that I saw in documentaries about the Japanese, this just pales in comparison. It seems, I don't want to take away from the video and how, but just like the Japanese they seemed almost kind of brainwashed into, and like right when the emperor spoke to say, all right, the war's over, like the switch was turned off. And it seems a little bit different here. I almost regret even bringing that up because that's not what this is about. But
on the momentum of Operation Bagration to launch the Vistula-Oder offensive, a crushing drive into Poland that saw Germany lose their first conquest of the war. With renowned Field Marshal Georgy Zhukov at the head, the Soviets obliterated 45 divisions and claimed to have killed or captured 400,000 men, stopping at the Oder River bordering the fatherland. The propaganda minister recorded a feeling of utter terror sweeping through the capital of the Reich, as the citizens of Berlin worried that the Soviets had a clear path to the city. There is nothing between us, no anti-tank gun, no anti-tank obstacles, not a single soldier. This would not be true for long. The Luftwaffe's 1st Flieger Division, under noted tank hunter Hans Ulrich Rudel, was stationed in the defense of the city, and High Command hoped to use the planes to pick off Soviet tanks crossing the frozen Oder. German engineers on the ground would blast the ice in non-combat areas. There would be bombers where the Soviets were, and a moat where the Soviets were not. But the blasting proved to be ineffective against the thick ice, with even power saws unable to inflict lasting damage. The Oder River was quick to heal its wounds with fresh ice. This state of affairs would continue through early February, when a warmer weather and the thawing of the Oder River enabled the Germans to launch a last-ditch defensive, with Rudel's planes sortying out from quickly assembled defenses on the German side to eliminate Soviet tanks. It was one such sortie that ended Rudel's flying career. After dive-bombing 12 Soviet tanks, the Panzerkracher moved on a 13th kill, only for his engine to blow, driving white-hot debris into his leg. Rudel limped back to his airstrip, barely alive. In a way, this episode is a metaphor. The Germans continued to fight against a superior foe, even as their own equipment and leadership betrayed them. Germany's soldiers had little choice in the matter. Numerous members of the High Command had so thoroughly bought into the party's propaganda that they either sincerely believed that the Third Reich would still prevail somehow, or that if they were going to lose the war, they should take as many Untermenschen as possible with them. Clearer heads were well aware of the war crimes and brutality Nazi Germany had inflicted upon the world, and feared summary execution by the Soviets or a slower trial and execution from the Western Allies. Both situations bred an atmosphere of determination worthy of Bushido, creating a clique of leaders who were determined to die fighting.
No, I feel less bad for bringing up Japan a bunch. Because he did.
Bushido, creating a clique of leaders who were determined to die fighting for the Führer, and the men under their command had little choice but to follow suit. The situation was equally dire for civilians, as those who refused conscription into the Volkssturm were summarily hanged and displayed as warnings to their neighbors. Even Germans in liberated regions weren't safe. In the city of Aachen, the Americans installed lawyer Franz Oppenhoff as governor. A Wehrwolf unit of SS and Hitler Youth members as young as 16 killed Oppenhoff not long thereafter. Germany held out far longer than many would suspect, partially out of ideological fervor, but primarily out of fear, either of Allied justice or of Soviet or Nazi reprisals. Even with this intoxicating mix of fear and zeal in the air, Hitler came to believe that the German people were not only weak, but had betrayed their Führer and cost themselves the chance for racial domination. His paranoia reached its zenith in March 1945, when Albert Speer presented Hitler with a report stating the economy could hold out for another month, perhaps two. Speer's reports ended with an uncharacteristically humanitarian plea, urging his Führer to consider the safety and survival of the German people and to make provisions for them in the post-war world. Hitler's alleged response displayed the ruthlessness he perceived his subjects lacked. He exclaimed, "If the war is lost, the people will be lost also. It is not necessary to worry about what the German people will need for elemental survival. On the contrary, it is best for us to destroy even these things." If the German economy would not hold, if the people could not rally behind him to be led to Endsieg, and if Germany was to fall to the Allies, then the foes of fascism would not inherit a nation.
I mean, it seems like he was always a maniac, but I feel like he's reached his zenith at this point in the war, which you'd probably guess. Everything crashing in on him.
They would inherit a ruin. It was around this time that the Holocaust was rapidly intensified. As resources were depleted and territory was lost, the Nazis saw an imperative to accelerate their extermination of the lesser races before it was too late. Jewish ghettos across Poland and occupied Europe were emptied. Their occupants shipped off to extermination camps by the tens of thousands. This was the Nazis' last grasp at implementing their final solution to their Jewish question.
So I guess the plan all along was to win the war, and then all of the people in the concentration camp, mostly Jews, they would just execute them that way. I'm curious now to see like a graph, a line graph, I guess, with time and deaths. I'm assuming right around this time is when it just spikes up and, the death camps go into full gear, I suppose.
March 19th, 1945, Hitler issued the decree...
Sorry, I've been to Dachau, which wasn't a death camp. It was kind of like a model camp, I guess. It was one of the first ones. It was a powerful experience still. Auschwitz and Birkenau were in Poland, I believe. Or at least Auschwitz, maybe Birkenau was in modern-day Belarus. I'm not sure on that, but I've been to Dachau.
On March 19th, 1945, Hitler issued the decree concerning demolitions in the Reich territory, or as history would remember it, the Nero Decree, ordering the total destruction of all communications, manufacturing, and transportation infrastructure in Germany. Just days after, Goebbels gave a rousing address known as the Werwolf speech, exhorting every man and woman to join the semi-mythical...
Is there evidence behind Nero starting that? I've seen that a lot. You hear, Nero is one of those. Obviously, Caesar is an extremely knowable name, recognizable. But Nero, you hear about the fire, and he was full-blown crazy. But I wonder if that was just something that people just threw in, onto the pile of Nero. Like, yeah, he probably started it too, or if there was evidence that he actually did.
Resistance network and fight to the last. The Allies would conquer a barren hellscape of destruction and misery. Every man and woman to join the semi-mythical resistance network and fight to the last. The Allies would conquer a barren hellscape of destruction and misery. A misery visited upon the cowardly German people by their own ineptitude and inability to follow the glorious vision of Adolf Hitler. Speer was placed in charge of implementing the Nero Decree, yet understandably sat on his hands as far as enacting the wholesale destruction of Germany's infrastructure as an act of naked defiance that would have seen him put
this
against...
guy's crazy. If we do this, maybe we can win. And he's just like looking around.
A wall in previous years. It's an act of naked defiance that would have seen him put against a wall in previous years. He would not have to endure for long. The Soviet drive across the Oder paid increasing dividends, with the Soviets encircling and destroying army groups and divisions all along their offensive line and driving on Berlin. Hitler had now well and truly separated himself from reality as the Soviets closed in on Berlin. The remnants of Army Group Center, under command of Field Marshal Ferdinand Schomer, launched an offensive intended to break through the Soviet lines and reinforce the capital. The 4th Panzer Army found some small success, and Hitler saw an opportunity to launch a general counterattack, ordering the repositioning of forces to link up with Schorner's men and form pincers that would envelop Zhukov's entire army.
Well, I'm getting a flashback to Paris. People hate it when I bring up comparisons between Napoleonic France and Nazis. I'm not saying that Napoleonic France committed atrocities at any scale like the Germans did. Napoleon in that way obviously is nothing like Hitler. In terms of looking at a map as a battlefield, and that alone, I always get these kind of like, I remember something like that with Napoleon, and this kind of seems like replace Berlin with Paris, and Napoleon's kind of last stand with Blucher, and I don't know if Kutuzov and the other powers going in.
Army. Hitler was sure the plan would work, but when he unveiled this plan to his generals, he was met with the reality that such a bold offensive action was impossible. In a scene that has been comedically mistranslated in countless YouTube videos, Hitler raged at his generals, lamenting their coward translate. Bold offensive action was impossible. In a scene that has been comedically mistranslated in countless YouTube videos.
I've seen a lot of those. They're pretty funny, I gotta say.
Plan to his generals, he was met with the reality that such a bold offensive action was impossible. In a scene that has been comedically mistranslated in countless YouTube videos, Hitler raged at his generals, lamenting
some of
their
my more hardcore history people are going to be unhappy that I'm laughing at this part. He brought up the part, the YouTube videos with that movie with Hitler in it, with the guy playing Hitler. He seems to be doing a very good job acting and mistranslating the words. All right, go easy on me there.
Such a bold offensive action was impossible.
Obviously, this is an important part of the war. In a scene that has been comedically
mistranslated in countless YouTube videos, Hitler raged at his generals, lamenting their cowardice and declaring the war lost. The Soviets encircled Berlin the next day, and the fight for the capital began. But Hitler, in a final fit of vindictive madness, was set upon making the communists swim to victory in their own blood. The Soviet forces stormed the city, and brutal house-to-house fighting raged, culminating in the storming of the Reichstag on April 25th. Since January, Hitler had withdrawn underground to a complex called the Führer Bunker. It was from here he intended to oversee the final destruction of his enemies, or of Germany. If the Soviets captured Hitler, the propaganda value would be enormous, so his final plan was simple. With cyanide and a pistol shot, Adolf Hitler left the world he had been so keen to conquer, and in which he had caused such unnecessary suffering and death. The last hope of German victory had died long before, but Adolf Hitler no doubt imagined that it in fact died with him. With their Führer gone, hordes of his followers decided that they couldn't live in a world without National Socialism, and ardent Nazis from Goebbels to even the mayor of Leipzig would kill themselves, and in many cases, their entire families, as Nazi Germany crumbled around them. On May 7th, 1945, Germany surrendered. The German plan to win in the final years of the Second World War was entirely contingent on what was happening in the moment. Hitler and High Command spent the end of the war in a reactionary state, constantly shifting strategic priorities to ensure the completion of short-term objectives, most of which failed to materialize. Whether it was driving for the Caucasian oil fields in 1942 or raising millions of old men and boys to fight hardened Allied soldiers in 1944, Germany's harebrained schemes to snatch victory from a whirling maelstrom of annihilation show a dictatorial regime at the end of its rope. Hitler was not a military mastermind, but a vain tyrant with exceptional public speaking abilities who wished to inflict his vision upon the world. And when the world didn't accept his vision, he sought to punish it, starting with his own people.
That was really awesome. After reacting to a few and watching a few Armchair Historian videos, I've come to kind of expect the great quality of videos, but still blown away every time. Such a great channel. Yeah, that was crazy. I'm almost like done with, I gotta not watch a war video for a day or something like that, because again, I've been watching Japanese and Pacific War, World War II documentaries, and so nothing really surprises me here when it comes to Hitler killing himself, and then generals and people around him killing themselves and their family. Not only have I heard about that, but it's just not even on the scale of the Japanese. But that's not the point of this video. The Japanese aren't a point of this video. The point is that what a great orator can do to his people. And yeah, great channel, honestly. All right, I'll be back with another video tomorrow, guys. Hope you're doing well. See you guys next time.